These are by no means the only four things that your novel needs, but they are definitely things that it needs. If you boil enough novels down, you'll end up with an entire pot full of soggy paper pulp. You will also understand some of the common elements that most novels share and that are hard to get away from. Things that you need to have in order to keep a reader engaged and tell a compelling story. There are possibly things beyond these four, but this is what my scriptwriter could do in the budget I gave him, so. Alright, the first thing that your novel must have is conflict. 99% of all novels out there are driven by some kind of conflict. And the ones that aren't are still sort of driven by conflict, which we'll get to in a minute. Most novels center around a murderer that needs to be found, a romantic relationship that needs to blossom, a ring that Frodo must return to the Kmart in Mordor without a receipt. There's some kind of problem that the characters need to solve. We present a problem that the characters have to deal with, and the reader wants to see this problem solved, and then we solve it over the course of the story, throwing lots of hurdles and roadblocks and stuff in front of the characters. Conflict, by creating these unresolved questions, serves to keep a reader interested in a novel. Through a combination of curiosity and worry, we create the desire to know how things play out. Without a reason to keep reading, the reader will have no reason to keep reading. I think that's a reasonable thing to say. So what about those novels that lack conflict, the kind written by those literary fiction people who like to make my life more difficult? Well, I would argue that those novels do also have conflict. Remember, the purpose of conflict in a novel is to create an unresolved desire in the reader, something that will make them keep reading in order to resolve that desire. Desire, after all, is just a contract that we make with ourselves to be unhappy until we get the thing that we desire. The desire that you create in the reader can just be to consume more of something that's pleasant to consume. It doesn't have to relate to the resolution of a conflict, but it's still driving the reader to keep reading. When you're plowing through a bag of Doritos at midnight in your underwear alone, you're not working towards a specific goal, you're just shoving nacho chips in your mouth because it feels good and allows you to forget about your existential loneliness. You're not necessarily moving towards a resolution, you're just doing something that's pleasurable, and you keep doing that thing because it feels pleasurable to keep doing it. At least for the first half of the first bag, and then after that it just becomes a mess. Literary fiction or poetry or something else that's pleasant to read but doesn't have a heavy plot or conflict is just like eating an entire party-sized bag of Doritos late at night in your underwear. You're not necessarily working towards a goal, you're not necessarily working towards the resolution of something, you're just doing something pleasurable and you keep doing it because it's pleasurable. That can be enough to get somebody from the beginning of a novel until the end of a novel. The next thing that your novel needs is sensory information. The way a good novel communicates with its reader is very specific and relies on a certain type of information. Something like an architectural blueprint or a scientific methodology or some kind of business report gets very specific about quantities and qualities, measurements and specifications, very sort of concrete, quantified, mathematical, logical information. That's great for conveying technical information, but when it comes to writing engaging fiction, we want to engage the reader in a sensory way. We describe the feeling of the environment, what sights, sounds, smells, tastes, and textures it evokes in our characters. That's what separates a novel from an architectural blueprint or report. You don't describe the big building as a 40-story glass facaded, pillow box framed skyscraper. You describe how it towers up above the character, the pain in the back of their neck as they crane their neck up to look at it, that dizzy vertigo feeling it gives them as the sun glints off the endless rows of windows. We don't describe how big something is, we describe how big it is makes the character feel. That's sensory information. Readers need to feel what your story is like to experience, not just understand how to measure it. Feelings are closely tied to emotions, and emotions are what get people into a story. What separates a logical retelling of events and a compelling story is often the details that create vivid imagery and feelings within the reader. While novels do rely on this emotional, feelings-driven part of people's brains to pull them in, the logical part of the brain is not something that we can ignore. The next thing that every novel must have is immersion. Conflict will get a reader interested in a story. Sensory information allows them to connect more deeply with the events that are happening in that story. Immersion is about keeping them there. Breaking immersion is a bad thing. Fiction, when you think about it, is an inherently illogical thing to consume. I mean, these people aren't real. The world that they're in might not be real. The events that are happening never actually happened. It's a weird thing to spend time on. There's a logical part of people's brains that is constantly trying to pull them out of fiction, trying to tell them that this is not real and it's not worth wasting our time on. This is why keeping the reader immersed is so important. You don't want anything in your novel that will break them out of that emotion-driven state where they're consuming it. Imagine that you're an insane person and go to a rock concert with a bunch of people in it. You're there standing among all those other people jumping up and down to the music or whatever people do at rock concerts. Everyone is excited and engaged. They're really enjoying listening to whoever is on stage. Now imagine that the sound system stops working for 10 seconds once every 3 minutes. The music completely stops, everything goes silent. Can you see how that would be a really sucky concert to attend? That's what happens when immersion is broken in your novel, and there are a great many things that can break it. You can have sensory information, really engaging characters, a plot that introduces a lot of interesting conflict, but if the reader keeps getting jarred out of the story every few pages, it's gonna suck. Some things that can break immersion: poor sentence structure. If you've got an awkward sentence or a repetitive structure or weird comma placement, that can break the flow of the prose and make it harder for somebody to become immersed. If they have to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what is being said because the prose isn't clear, that will break them out of immersion. Confusion can also do this. If the reader loses the thread of a dialogue exchange, or if they can't figure out where the characters are spatially, or if there's a character in the scene and they forget who that character is, or if they miss some kind of plot revelation, then they will lose immersion because they don't understand what's going on in the story. Switching viewpoints can also cause this to happen. If the novel has a large cast and we're following one character for a chapter and the reader really likes that character's storyline, but then in the next chapter we move to a different character that they don't like as much, that can break immersion and it will pull them out of the story. That's unavoidable if you've got a big multi-POV cast, but it's something that the reader will react to. You want your novel to hold your reader's head underwater as much as possible and not give them anything that's going to make them come up for air. Don't actually hold people's heads underwater. That's just a metaphor. Don't actually do that. And the last thing that your novel needs to have: an essence. I am a strong believer in having a strong thing that strongly ties your story together in a strong way. Something that you can give a 1 or 2 sentence description of and encapsulate your novel, at least the major parts of it. I use the term essence for this because I think it captures a broader idea than something like theme or tone or mood does. I think essence kind of goes beyond all of those things. It also makes me sound kind of smart, which is important for preserving my very fragile ego. One of my favorite novels of all time is East of Eden by John Steinbeck. But because that story is so large and multi-layered and it has a few different threads and it takes place over so many different years, it's really hard to explain to people what that novel is about. I don't have a very succinct way to explain why people should read it, beyond just gushing about the fact that it's a really good novel. I think this is part of the reason that, despite being, in my view, his best work, East of Eden has not risen to the level of cultural prominence that other works by John Steinbeck have. You hear a lot more about The Grapes of Wrath or Of Mice and Men than you do of East of Eden, even though I think it's a much better novel than both of those other ones. Cannery Row is also really good. You should read that too. An essence can be built around a theme, some moral of the story, a plot or setting element, a particular character, pretty much anything. Having a strong essence to your story will help both with writing it, but also with readers reading it. It gives the reader a way to get their arms around your story, to understand what it's all about. It will tell them very quickly if this is something they're interested in or not interested in. Essence is one of the ways that you package your story. It gives you a guiding light towards the direction that it needs to take. It tells readers whether it's something for them or not. If you have a scattered novel, one that just tries to do everything, one that lacks this sort of central direction, it's going to be tougher to make it good. An essence can be built around almost anything, but I think it's an important thing to consider, and if you don't have it, it's going to be hard to write a good novel, in my opinion. Speaking of opinions, I'm of the opinion that this video has gotten way too long already, so I'm going to end it here. So there you have it. I'd love to hear what you think about this in the comments down below. As always, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.